All right, it's already recording, so I'll just start. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the broadcast. It is Wednesday, June 6, 2018. I think this is one of the most requested broadcasts in the Evoke library. I think it brings up a lot of anxiety for our families as they prepare for and plan for a transition, either out of our program or coming home. It comes up, there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of safety that gets created when your child is in our program, right? That you're kind of buffered from the day-to-day, and the support around your child for the time being while they're with us is so substantial that it can become difficult. So I'm going to talk about transitioning out of the program, and I'm also going to talk about transitioning home. And before I say any of that, before I get into any of that, I just want to acknowledge and just be aware of how difficult this process is. You know, I'm aware of it as a father, that even in ideal circumstances and conditions, parenting is very difficult. And then you start to mix in some issues where your child is struggling with mental health or addiction issues, and it becomes phenomenally difficult. And so much of my thinking is about preparing you, providing you with ideas for support so that you're not overwhelmed by the process. It doesn't mean that I necessarily have all of the answers to give you certain tools, magic bullets, so that everything will go perfectly well. But I hope I can provide you some additional support, serenity in this process as you anticipate or go through having your child come home in the process. So with that, let's get into tonight's content. I want to talk about regression first of all. And with regression and relapse, I'm going to say, while it is a normal part of the process, we don't necessarily use that as an excuse on the front end, but it's really, really important to prepare for it. It's really important to anticipate it, because I think for so many people, the wilderness experience can be so powerful, so dynamic, such a safe kind of cocoon for the child and for the family, that it can become very disappointing when there are moments of regression. I like it when students can experience some regression during our program so that you can have some practice in dealing with it. Years ago, I was sitting in a parent support group in upstate New York talking to a group of families. And as they were going around telling their story a bit, it got to a grandfather who was raising his granddaughter. And he shared that his bubble was burst, that he was at that wilderness high, that very end of the program, where his granddaughter was transitioning into a therapeutic school for aftercare. So he shared that his bubble was burst as he'd heard how well some of the other clients did in the program, and then afterwards they still had some of their struggles. And of course, everybody was very anxious and eager to comfort him in his anxiety, what they thought was his anxiety. And he interrupted them after just a moment. And he said, "Let me be clear, my bubble is burst, but I think that's a good thing. I think it's critical that I really realistically look at the long road ahead of us." And so in some ways, it's getting out of that unrealistic place where everything is cured and we've arrived at the finish line. I always say in psychotherapy with every client that one of the ideas is to never arrive, right? Never arrive at the destination, but always remain on the journey. And when we do that, we have a much more realistic and a much happier time of it. Regression can happen during times of stress. I remember in woodshop during middle school, the first thing that we were assigned to do was to make a breadboard. I think it's because that's the easiest possible thing you can make in woodshop. And so you glue these different types of wood or different colors of wood together, and then the professor takes one of them and he tries to snap it. And if it snaps where the boards were glued together, then he said we didn't do a good job. But if it was snapped in the middle of the wood or somewhere else, he said we did a good job. His point being that the seams between, right, the things in between, transitioning from one to another, is often the weakest point, the weakest part of our journey. And that's why a lot of parents ask questions about spending extra time with their child in between Evoke and the next program. And after decades of watching this process, that can be one of the most vulnerable times for your child. I would much rather see your child get settled into the new school or program and you make a subsequent visit after things have stabilized. But emotions are going to come up, right? Wantings, longing for home, wanting to talk to people. And the things that we so much associate with positive in this process can be hard. A phone call to a friend or a sibling, while that might be a desired thing, and even something that's okay and approved, suggested by the therapist, I just want you to know it can be a very painful process too. I've been on a couple of these transitional trips with families. And I think in many cases, dropping your child off at a therapeutic school or program, my experience is that can be a harder process for both the parent and the child. I remember doing it with my own son, and it was much harder than sending him to wilderness because it's a longer length of stay, right? And you've reconnected. You've healed some of the wounds between you. So transitions provide stress, new challenges. I've used this analogy for years, and I think it illustrates the idea of regression in a new light. If I taught you or you learned how to juggle 3 balls, I can juggle 3 balls, for example. And then I handed you 3 more balls, so you had 6 now, and asked you to juggle. You would drop all of them, right? It would look like you were absolutely incapable of juggling at all, because all 6 would fall to the floor. You might retain 1. And the fact of the matter is, you haven't lost the skill to juggle, but you're juggling more now. And so when more peers get introduced, when outside contact with the outside world gets reintroduced, when more academics or work gets reintroduced, you're introducing all these other stressors. And I think one of the misunderstandings that I've seen with wilderness therapy as people consider it is it's really in some ways the safest and easiest place for a child. Right? There's so much healthy and nurturing containment in wilderness therapy. It's a small box. And when that box expands, it becomes more difficult. So in some ways, the regression really is just due to the introduction of more opportunities, more responsibilities in the process. In sports psychology, when I studied sports psychology early on in my career, what we learn is that what we're most comfortable with, and often those can be bad habits in sports, is the thing that we go to when we're under stress, right? You could practice for hours on the driving range, for example, in golf, but when you go to that first tee and everything's on the line, you might have a crowd of people watching you. If any of you have ever played in a golf tournament, you're likely to resort to bad habits that feel comfortable to you rather than the new things that you've been practicing. So there's an analogy there that we go back to what is comfortable for us when we're introduced to new stressors in our life, more anxiety, more pressure. There are more choices, similar to the juggling analogy. There are more choices and opportunities. And we want your child to struggle and battle through difficulty and adversity and mistakes. One of the ideas that I've been passionate about for years and telling families, if there's a handful of things that I could encourage families to adopt in their thinking, one of those would be, near the top of the list, is learn to value the struggles and the setbacks as much as you do the successes. Learn to see the value in those. Problem is, they're scary sometimes. Problem is, we have literal, real trauma from some of the things that our children have done in the past. And so it's hard to maintain that kind of perspective when there are setbacks. It's a lot easier, of course, as a treatment professional than it is as a parent to hold that struggle, that mistake, that relapse, to hold that with a certain kind of value, with a perspective that it can be an important part of the lesson. That failing is one of the greatest impetus for change, for positive change in our life. Freud used to say, if you want somebody to grow, give them the task that they're likely to fail at, to watch them grow. They're experimenting with self and with others, right? They've kind of, for the most part, become accustomed to operating within this small box. But then they're going to experiment, right? They're not quite sure that everything they were invited to live, the new ideas, the new content, the new skills, they're not really sure that those things are necessary or valuable to them. So they're going to try going outside of that box, of that expectation, of the boundaries. They've got to experience the futility of the old ways of coping. And sometimes that's after wilderness. That's after our program. It's more common than not, much more common than not. And the research bears it out that our clients, after they graduate, will have regression before they'll eventually go to a higher level of functioning even that they were at during their program. That's what the curve looks like in the research. So they've kind of, I talked to a former student of ours from 14 years ago. I just had lunch with him the other day, and he was saying sometimes to a fault, he had specifically a substance abuse disorder. Sometimes he to a fault, he encourages friends and peers to go out and keep trying the experiment. Go out there again, see if it works for you. When you're ready, you know where to come. You know what to do. For parents, that there's that moment where they say sometimes to themselves and sometimes out loud, I thought we were past this, right? You held a boundary through a letter, through having your child in the program, maybe even a phone call, maybe even a visit, and then at the end of the program, they bring it up again. Ask a question that had been answered. Entirely common, right? There's this old saying that you're either pregnant or you're not. And applying it to this idea, that's not true, right? I, as a father, have gone through, as a father, 4 successful pregnancies with my wife. But there are levels of pregnancy, levels of having children, right? There's when you first take the first pregnancy test and it's positive. There's when you go to the doctor. That's another level. There's morning sickness for some women. That's another level. There's when you start to show. That's another level. There's when you start to feel the baby move, right? That's another level. There's labor and delivery. Those are other levels. I remember walking out of the hospital with our second child. And I remember specifically thinking, oh, this is different. This is, we have to play man-to-man defense now because she's got one and I got to have one, right? It's going to be hard for us to do a 2-on-1 situation. So I just use that analogy because it's like that for children. Like, yes, you said no in a letter. Yes, you said no over the phone. Yes, you said no on a visit, but I'm still going to ask again. And if your expectation is that when the boundary is set, it won't be revisited again, you're most likely going to find yourself disappointed. And the best book on boundaries that I know, the Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner, she talks about this idea of drive-by boundary setting, that we have to be relentless in our maintenance of our boundaries. And we have to be ready for what she calls change back messages from the people in our lives. So yes, it's going to be revisited. Like I said, regression is a part of the process. Regression specifically is an emotional state that we go through when we revert to old ways of coping. I think about that in my own therapy and therapy with my clients all the time. Right? Going home, even as an adult, is a regressive situation. Holidays can be regressive situations. If somebody gets loud or big around me, I can regress, right? I go back to earlier phases. All of us can relate to this. We've seen it with our spouses and partners, right? Where they get around their brother, their sister, their parents, and they start to act like a teenager again. All right? That's regression. So it's not uncommon for anybody. Like I said, when you normalize it, you're really de-shaming it. You're trying to take the shame energy out of the equation, out of the observation. You're not setting it up for an excuse, but you're trying to increase awareness. And instead of kind of having a black and white pass or fail thinking toward it. One of the research that I've read that has been done with children that go home, parents who identify themselves as successful say that they eliminate the all or nothing thinking, right? We're not back at square one or back at zero. Those statements, those ideas are really triggering for people. It's a younger and less sophisticated manner of coping with stress or emotions. Like I said, holidays, family, or other triggers. Being tired, hungry, or sick can lead to regression. So let's talk about relapse. Like regression, it's a part of recovery. We don't seek it out and use it as an excuse, but we understand its place and we prepare to respond for it when it comes. And like I said, it's normalizing. That's a therapeutic term. It really means to de-shame it, to take the judgment out of it, to just see it for what it is. I told this story, and I think it's one of the most interesting experiences I've had with a parent. I was doing some coaching with a parent after their son left the wilderness and went home. And they had a contract in place, and of course, I was talking to the father at a time when his son was starting to regress, to go back into some of those relapse and some of those old behaviors, and even develop some new ones. And the father, particularly triggered in one moment by something that his son did, he said to me on the phone, he said, "Brad, I went up to his room. I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I yelled at him and said, 'Why are you doing the things that you know you're not supposed to do?'" And I paused him and I said, "Let's just recite what you just shared with me. You just said to me, you know you're not supposed to do this, but you went up to your son's room and asked him why is he doing something that he knows he's not supposed to do." Right? If we're honest with ourselves, we can relate to our children. It's scary to relate to our children because it takes away from us a sense of control, right? We live by judgments. We live by externalizing the bad, the evil in us, right? Seeing it in other people. We're afraid if we relate to it and empathize with it, we take that sting of judgment out of it, then there'll be no guardrails, right? That they're going to feel validated to the point that they're going to feel enabled or encouraged that it's okay to do that. Right? That's where that comes from. But we know just the opposite to be true over the long run, with the long arc of growth. We know that connecting to people, that empathizing with people, that connecting on a sameness kind of level takes away the judgment and opens up a road, a bridge to healthy recovery and healing. But we have to do battle with our need to control things. Try to steer away from addictive thinking so that the relapse doesn't become a catastrophe, right? All or nothing, trauma-based responses, right? Old responses in you can make it a bigger deal than it is. And like I said, your trauma has come to you, your trauma response has come to you honestly. It's part of learning the lessons. Most people don't have a perfect road, a perfect learning curve from the first intervention or from the wilderness intervention to the rest of their lives. You know, most of the time, it's a little bit of a zigzaggy curve, learning curve. It's hard. That's why you need support. That's why you need support groups. That's why you need education, reminders. I say to my clients, be around people who have long-term recovery, right? Who are doing well in their life with their mental health issues, depression, anxiety, and so forth. Be around those people who have been through a lot, who had many failures and relapses. When you surround yourself, hear from those people, talk to those people, it starts to rewire your brain to know that as a parent, when you're in that moment, you think everything is a disaster, that you can see the other side of it. I have the luxury of being around many, many friends, colleagues, associates, who have been on a very zigzaggy path of mental health recovery and addiction recovery. And because of that, right, I have a different perspective. My third child of my four, who's going through their teenage years, I have a different perspective than I did with my firstborn child. I was sure that my firstborn child and all of his friends were going to grow up to be hooligans. I didn't grow up in the 1950s, so I didn't use that word, but that they were going to be problem adults. And now I look at my 25-year-old son and all of his friends, and they're amazing young men, young adults, and young women. So surrounding myself with those kinds of stories is important. There's a difference between a relapse and a flare-up. A relapse really is where somebody has descended into the thinking, the denial, the justification, the defensiveness. A flare-up is a misstep, where they quickly wake up and come out of it and learn to see the difference between the two. A relapse might require or might suggest a more significant boundary on your part, right? You might say, I'm not willing to do this, go down this road. I'm not willing to do this experiment with you anymore, so here are my boundaries. Whereas a flare-up is where you can all work on it and have a discussion together. I've had both with my children, and learning to kind of recognize and see them as part of a continuum, I think is valuable. I want to tell you this, and I could go in depth in my own story, but lessons, tools, skills, insights, they do lie dormant for some time. After I was sent away to treatment when I was 16, I turned 17 in treatment, and I came out. The insights that I had, the awareness that I had, lied dormant for 6 to 8 months. And then when my experimenting was done again, they all came back to me. I've met clients from years ago who tell me just the same thing. They had some real low valleys afterward. But they come back and we have discussions where they talk about things that they remember talking about, insights that they had. Learning triggers and reassessing maintenance and support strategies, right? What's the lesson in it for you? What resources do you need? And really, this goes back to pay attention to your relapse. I think we do well at discussing, talking about, and considering the relapse of our children, but do we do that well with ourselves? Does that become part of our language? My suggestion is, I believe this, know this to be true. If you talk about your relapses, as often as you talk about your child's relapses with them, it's going to be a much safer environment, much safer system for your child. So think about, talk about, consider your relapses, identify what they are. And when you do this, it's really important because it gives everybody a kind of a serenity. It gives you some awareness that they know what they know. They can't unlearn it, right? It's there. They're changed and they're different after these kinds of interventions. And so you hold the struggle loosely, gently. Some common examples or processes around regression in the initial phase of the program, both our program and subsequent programs, right? There can be a lot of regression. It's surprising to families that when children go to the next level of care, the next phase of treatment along the treatment journey, that they'll regress and sound like and look like some of the initial phases of our program, but that's not uncommon at all. Levels, transitions, moving up a phase can lead to regression. External events, of course, stressors, even positive ones like a peer visit can cause regression. Peers leaving, tests coming up, letters, assignments, girlfriend, boyfriend issues, right? Any anticipated event which causes stress because novelty is difficult for many people. Discharge can cause regression, leading up to, and of course, the discharge itself. While everybody in the program would say that's something that is desired, they don't want to be honest with themselves that discharge comes with greater challenges. Looking back, that's why I have hundreds of examples of clients and students who have said to me, that was a special time in my life. Home can be a trigger for regression. Typical phases that we look at is there's a honeymoon phase, then there's a regression phase, a recovery phase, and eventually a maintenance phase. That's a common trajectory, a common curve. Like I said, I like for regression to happen during the program. Early on in my career, I didn't like it, right? I liked for students and clients to peak in our program and then for us to hand the baton off to the next professional. I liked it because I could pat myself on the back, proud of myself for the great work that we were doing as a program. But I realized that that's not realistic about how the way life goes. And so being with families through regressive relapse moments is really important. Helping them sort it out, digest it, recover from it. At the next level of care, you're not as insulated as you are in wilderness, right? Yes, you can have visits, phone calls, but most of the week you're fairly insulated. And by design, therapeutic and schools and programs for all ages have less of that. It's more like real life. And because it's more like real life, it is more challenging. I think one of the biggest mistakes that parents make in thinking about the next program is that because the child who has done well with us, because they desire a less restrictive level of care, right? When given options, they're going to often seek for the most autonomy and freedom. And because the parents are inclined to want to please that wish, because students have done well, not wanting to fight the battle again around the boundary. What I will tell you is it's hard. It's harder. And parents who have gone through the process, many of them can attest to the fact that the thinking that led to their decision may have been a little flawed because they thought it was going to be, because the child desired it so much, wanted it so much, they thought that it was going to be better. When I go around to schools and programs and meet students, former students or students that I didn't even have, sometimes the more restrictive places, they're happier, right? They're safer. Yes, if asked, most of them would say, I would rather go home. But sometimes programs that appeal or sell that extra amount of freedom don't do well to explain that with that comes a tremendous challenge. Less of an insulation from the parent, more daily work from the family, possibly more work on your boundaries with the child because they have more access to you, more phone calls, more choices that lead them to potential relapses and regression. I think about the idea that as I go through this process, one of the things that I teach to parents is to try not to be so attached to the journey that the highs become too high or the lows become too low. Along with that is this language of I'm proud or disappointed in you, right? Something I strive for as a father is to avoid both of those things because it's not about me, right? And your job isn't to make me proud or to avoid disappointing me. If that's your job as a child, you're really taking care of me. You're not doing the work that you need to do to figure you out. And you're also getting wired to think that what other people think about you is about you. And that goes for peers, right? You become less evolved as a self when you're led by that expression of I'm proud of you or I'm disappointed in you as a parent. So I encourage folks to stay away from that. So when you're leaving Evoke, potentially going to a new program, there can be a honeymoon for both of you, right? For you, it can be difficult because it's such a different goal, such a different environment. Adjusting to less communication, less dynamic growth, right? It's more like real life. For your child, do not be surprised. Do not be surprised if you get letters saying, after the honeymoon, this isn't the right place, this isn't the right people, I did like my time at Evoke, and I can come home and do the work, right? That's a very common, it would be uncommon not to get that, a version of that letter. So, and remember, I am recording this June 6, 2018. There are many people on here live tonight. That's for sure. And if you're watching this as a recorded webinar or you're listening to this as a recorded podcast, just know that I predicted it long before you even came to our program. It's normal, it's typical. There's a different level of customer service, frankly, for therapeutic schools and programs after Evoke, commonly. because we're dealing with the crisis, right? We're dealing with stabilization, with early assessment, with the most volatile part of the treatment process. So our customer service is very, very high. Our communication is extensive. You have access to a lot of resources at Evoke. Just as a reminder, you have access to these webinars and podcasts for the rest of your life. Always to check back in with. But I want to prepare you for the fact that it's a little bit less attentive in many cases. If it's not, that's okay, but don't be surprised if you feel that the communication is shorter, less time on the phone with the therapist, fewer updates, less specifics. It's more like real life. It's a slower pace of growth. There's less diagnostics going on. And prepare for the wrong place letter, like I said. You're going to hear new things. You know, I think I've said this. When a child graduates from our program and we consider it one of the greater successful treatment pieces for a child, I think we still have about, in the best cases, 80% of the truth of the child. I can think of so many examples of students that did so well with us. And there's still some uncovered dynamics, stories, accountability. That's not uncommon. That's why we recommend aftercare. There's still more work to be done. It's easy to manipulate and to capitalize on your doubts and your adjustment, right? If you're going through an adjustment to a less dynamic process, less intense communication, you combine that with the child experiencing this is the wrong place for me, and they can capitalize on that. What I say to parents is, if that becomes something that you ask, talk to the therapist. Be honest with the therapist. If you have a consultant involved, ideally you do, talk to them. Talk to the referring professional. And if it's the wrong place, then it's not home. It's a different place, right? That's where parents, I think, come to know when I ask them that question, when I say, okay, are you considering, if this is the wrong place, if you feel like it's a bad fit, let's find one that's a good fit. Let's try again. But if your response is, if you're thinking as well, maybe they should just come home, then you're really battling a different kind of question and dilemma than it being the wrong place, right? It's those old heartstrings. It's really valuable to go through a step down for most of our clients so they get practice with something that's more like everyday life. And then watch for the improvement. Start to listen to, as you talk to the therapist, your child, start to listen and pay attention to what it would sound like if they were in a healthy place versus if they weren't. Right? There's a level of surrender. There's a level of openness. There's a level of accountability, of insight about self. Right? They see the similarities between others. They're honest about the desire to come home, but they recognize that the dynamics are such that might not be the best place for them. At home, there can be a similar process of a honeymoon, right? Don't be surprised. Prepare yourself for the testing of the limits. They've got to test it. Just like the pregnancy analogy earlier, each level is a new opportunity to practice, to test, to experiment with the limits. And then have solid aftercare plans. Aftercare plans don't just mean residential programs after Evoke, but it also means home therapist meetings, your own work in the process, family therapy. So what are the take home? Endure it. It's a long arc, right? You're going to go through highs and lows. It's great to practice the mundane, the everyday. You know, something about Evoke that's interesting is it's exciting and new. Even when they're annoyed by it, it's exciting and new. Some of the times toward the end of the program when they say, I've done everything I need to do here, that's my favorite time. Because life isn't always exciting. Sometimes it's just a Tuesday gloomy morning. And learning how to cope with a Tuesday gloomy morning is really where the gold is. right? I used to run Ironman races and marathons. And we used to talk about our training as part of the race, the hardest part of the race. The race itself is so exciting. It's so fun. It's challenging, but it's the best day. It is that Tuesday morning out at the track doing interval training when it's raining. That's the hard stuff. It's that Saturday afternoon when you don't feel like working out. That's the hard part of the race. Stop with some of your expectations, right? Practice, learn about emotional detachment. And what I say is expect, this is the best advice I think I could give. Don't rely on or expect anybody to change, especially your child. Assume that nobody else in the system is going to change. What that does, what that kind of thinking does, is it requires you to look at yourself, to focus most of your energy on how do I deal with it when my child tests the limits, regresses, relapses, struggles. How do I do it? What's my lesson? What's my takeaway? What do I need to practice? Watch out for the black and white thinking, all or nothing. We're back at square one. We're back where we were before. Again, those are very triggering, powerful, traumatic kinds of thoughts and expressions. And focus on your response. I loved it. I had a mother years ago who took her son after he was in aftercare, another program, and she went on a trip with him to look at colleges. And it was great. She said to me, you know, he started talking about one of the schools and the ways that he used to talk about schools. I could tell he was really focusing on not the most important aspects of the school. She said, but that's not my point of the story. My point of the story is I learned to respond to it different. I just listened, empathized, reflected, understood, and it made all the difference in the world. Focus, like I said, on your regression and your relapse. It's as simple as this. If you focus on what you can control, you'll be less depressed and anxious. If you focus on what you cannot control, you'll be more depressed and more anxious. It is as simple as that. That's a kind of idea that transcends all of our issues. Take it a day at a time. Take your own work a day at a time. Look at it as a day at a time, not globalizing the problem, the mistake, the setback. Learn to recognize your own triggers, focus on your behaviors, and get support for yourself. Therapy, support groups, what have you. Find ways to focus on the resources that you need to be there to support your child. And our children that go through Evoke, our children, require more resources than children who don't need this intervention. So that means you're going to have to fill up the tank more, right? That means you're going to need to find sources, resources for support more than somebody who doesn't go through this part of this part of life. And then focus on the journey rather than arriving at the destination. I'm happy to take any questions that come up for you. We can also pause here, and I can go to that toward the end. So let me give some of the announcements, and then I'll come back to the question slide. Remember, all of these broadcasts are available in podcast. Please share these with your friends, social media. They're starting to proliferate more. It's something we want to share with the entire world. So feel free to share the podcasts with everybody. On your iOS or iPhone device, you go to the podcast app. On your Android device, download the SoundCloud app. On any computer, go to soundcloud.com, and in any of those platforms, just search Evoke Therapy Programs and subscribe there. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram for inspirational stories, content, pictures. On Facebook, search Evoke Therapy Programs. And then you can also go to the Evoke Family Foundation on Facebook. This is an organization of alumni, parents who have come together to raise money to support people who cannot afford treatment. So if you want to get back, want to be involved, you can reach them there. Go to our blog on the Evoke Therapy website for new content constantly. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available on Amazon. It'll be back next Friday in the main Amazon warehouse. Until then, if you want to buy a copy, you simply go to the options under the paperback tab on Amazon and click on the new ones there and buy it from Evoke Therapy Programs there. You can also buy an audio version of it through Amazon and on Audible or a CD purchase. Upcoming intensives, if you want to do a deep piece of work for yourself, this is incredible. For me, I believe in this as much as anything that we do. Finding You will be July 18th through 22nd is the next Finding You. It is already filling up, so please schedule now. You can go to our website to look at the dates. July 18th through 22nd, and then August 15th through 19th are more. It's mindfulness, it's family of origin work, working on your own trauma, your own lessons, your own scripts from childhood. We're having a Finding You 2. We're going to open up a second Finding You 2 because the first Finding You 2 has filled up already. So we'll be announcing the next date for the Finding You 2. And we're also going to have our first alumni intensive. By the end of the week, I'll have dates for that. So that's any student client that's been through our program who is now 18 years and older can come to the Evoke Summit Lodge in Park City, Utah, and I'll be running the alumni intensive there. Customized family intensives, contact our admissions team. If you are a professional and you're interested in doing some of your own work around what it means to be in the therapeutic or treatment industry, we run men's and women's groups for those. The next men's group is June 10th through 12th with a spot in it. The next women's group is September 9th through 11th. You can go to our website or contact admissions for more questions. I don't have all the dates for the upcoming parent support groups. We'll be announcing those soon. I have one more broadcast before I go on sabbatical for 6 weeks, but we will be having in the next couple of months parent support groups in New York City, Southern California, Northern California, the Northwest, Seattle and/or Portland, Chicago, Toronto, and DC announced. Contact Melanie at Evoke.com for more questions. We want every family that can, every set of parents that can, we want them to come to one of the workshops. The next one is June 23rd and 24th at our Entrada, Utah location. You can combine that with a field visit to visit your child, talk to your therapist, your Evoke therapist, to find out if the timing is right, and contact Gail at evoketherapy.com for more information or to RSVP. Pursuits trips are for young adults or for families. Think therapy light, sober fun, adventure trips all around the world, service projects, all kinds of adventure activities. You can schedule a custom one by talking to our admissions team. All right, I'm happy to answer any other questions that have come in. And it looks like no questions have come in. So, with that, I will end the broadcast. And the next one, the last one before my sabbatical, I want to just encourage you to invite any family, friends, grandparents, uncles, aunts, brothers and sisters. This is for siblings. If you want to ask questions about or for and in behalf of family member and friends, please do. If you want them to attend, please encourage them to attend. Send any of your questions ahead of time to webinar@evoketherapy.com. We'll be happy to answer the questions and the pre-submitted ones first and any live ones that come. This will be next Thursday, June 14th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. So I look forward to that. Again, as always, thank you for and in behalf of your children for the work that you're willing to do. And I want to emphasize this. It takes courage to do your own work, to look at yourself. Many people don't want to. And they have well-articulated reasons why. But I think it's because it's really scary stuff to do. It's really hard to look at ourselves. It's much easier to just look at other people, especially our children and their problems, and focus on that. It's much harder to see our relationship with the issue. So thank you for and on behalf of your children for the work that you're willing to do, for showing up to these, and I'll talk to you next Thursday night. Take care. Bye-bye.